The small auditorium buzzed with the chatter of parents, students, and teachers. The smell of old wooden floors mixed with faint traces of popcorn and school snacks. Everyone had gathered for the annual talent show, a tradition that brought excitement, laughter, and sometimes embarrassment. Among the performers, there was one boy who had always been different, someone people never quite took seriously. He was quiet, often seen alone in the corners of the playground, with his thin glasses perched on the tip of his nose and clothes that never seemed to match. Some students whispered about him behind his back. Some laughed when they saw him practicing quietly in the music room. But no one ever imagined what he could do. When it was finally his turn, he walked onto the stage slowly, each step deliberate. His fingers twitched slightly, and he avoided looking directly at the audience, keeping his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the piano. A few snickers ran through the crowd, quickly followed by louder whispers. Some students pointed and chuckled, whispering things like, "Is he really going to play?" And "I don't think anyone wants to see this." Even a few parents looked puzzled, wondering why he had signed up at all. The boy's shoulders hunched a little under the weight of everyone's eyes. His stomach twisted into knots. For a moment he froze, unsure if he could even start. The lights in the auditorium felt blinding, making the stage seem much larger than it actually was. The echo of laughter and murmurs bounced off the walls, making it hard for him to breathe. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. He could hear the thump of his own heartbeat, loud and chaotic in his ears. It felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For a while, the audience continued their quiet ridicule. Some students exchanged bets on whether he would finish the first line of a song without making a mistake. Others whispered jokes under their breath, thinking it was hilarious that someone so awkward would even try. The boy's palms were sweaty, his throat dry, but he refused to let the fear take over completely. He had spent years secretly practicing, hours after school when no one was watching. Every day he had sat at this very piano, imagining this moment, dreaming of the day he could show everyone that he wasn't just the quiet, awkward boy they thought he was. He glanced down at the keys, their black and white patterns staring back at him like an unspoken challenge. Slowly, he pressed down on one key, then another. The first note sounded small, almost fragile, but it carried a hint of something more. The crowd shifted, sensing the hesitance, and a few snickers escaped again. But he didn't stop. He took another deep breath and let his fingers move with more confidence this time. Each note felt like a small victory, a tiny declaration that he would not let the laughter define him. Some students started to notice something unusual. The notes, though few at first, seemed carefully chosen. There was a rhythm, a pattern, something that made the music feel alive. The boy's eyes were closed now, and for a moment it was as if he was playing not for the audience, but for himself. The room, once filled with laughter, began to fall into a quiet curiosity. People leaned forward in their seats without realizing it. The whispers faded, replaced by a soft tension, a feeling that something extraordinary might be about to happen. The boy remembered all the times he had been teased, all the moments he felt invisible, and even the times he had doubted himself. But here, on this stage, something inside him shifted. He realized that his music was stronger than the fear. It didn't matter what anyone thought. Every note he played carried a piece of his heart, a fragment of all the hours he had spent alone, practicing in the quiet corners of the school. Every time he struck a key, it was a reminder that he was more than the laughter, more than the whispers, more than the awkward boy they thought they knew. As he continued to play, the sound of the piano started to fill the room more completely. The initial awkwardness of the first notes disappeared, replaced by a surprising clarity. The audience, who had been ready to laugh and move on, started to sit up straighter. Even the teachers exchanged glances, impressed by the concentration and the emotion in the performance. The boy's fingers danced across the keys, sometimes lightly, sometimes with force, creating a melody that was soft yet powerful. Each chord told a story of struggle, perseverance, and a quiet determination that no one had expected. A few students in the front row stopped laughing entirely. They were drawn in by the music, unable to look away. Some had never even considered that the boy could be talented. The realization slowly dawned on them. Perhaps they had judged him too quickly, based only on his awkward appearance and quiet nature. The auditorium, once noisy and judgmental, had become a space of surprise, curiosity, and unspoken respect. The boy opened his eyes slightly, glancing at the audience, but he didn't seek their approval. He was not playing to be liked. He was playing to be heard. With each note, he gained more confidence, moving beyond the fear that had nearly stopped him moments ago. The music flowed naturally now, almost as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, waiting to tell the story that words could not. And as the notes lingered in the air, the audience could feel it, the beauty, the struggle, and the unexpected depth of this shy, overlooked boy. Even those who had laughed earlier felt a twinge of guilt, realizing how wrong they had been to mock him. Their laughter had been shallow, based on appearances alone, while the boy's talent was deep, sincere, and utterly real. Some parents leaned closer in their seats, unsure if they should applaud yet, afraid to break the spell. Every note seemed to carry a message. Don't judge, don't underestimate, and never dismiss someone quietly working toward their dreams. By the time the first part of the song ended, the room was completely silent. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a tense, almost reverent pause. People looked around at each other, exchanging wide-eyed expressions of surprise. Even the students who had teased him the most were caught off guard. They had expected a mess, maybe a few awkward notes, but certainly not this level of skill. And the boy? He sat there, breathing steadily now, feeling the first spark of pride in a lifetime of self-doubt. He knew the hardest part was over. He had faced the audience, faced their ridicule, and had taken the first step toward proving that he was capable of something remarkable. After the first few notes, the boy paused, letting the silence in the auditorium stretch for a heartbeat. The quiet was different now. It wasn't mocking or impatient, it was curious, almost expectant. For the first time that evening, he felt the weight on his shoulders shift. The eyes of hundreds of people were still on him, but they no longer felt heavy with ridicule. Instead, they felt full of anticipation, like everyone was waiting to see what would come next. He looked down at his hands. The fingers that had trembled earlier now poised and steady above the piano keys. He remembered the countless evenings he had spent alone, practicing in a dimly lit room with only the soft glow of a desk lamp. No one had seen him then. No one had laughed. No one had doubted him. It was just him and the piano, creating music from nothing, building confidence note by note. And now, standing in front of this audience, he realized that all those quiet hours had been preparing him for this exact moment. He pressed the keys again. But this time the notes came out stronger, more confident. The melody he had practiced so many times before now had a life of its own. It was as though the music was speaking for him, telling a story that words never could. The audience could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand it. Some students leaned forward, their eyes widening in surprise. Teachers stopped taking notes and simply listened. Even the parents who had initially looked skeptical were drawn in. Captivated by the raw emotion pouring from the piano, the boy's fingers moved quickly now, almost dancing across the keys. He didn't rush, but there was a rhythm, a flow that carried the audience along with him. He remembered the times he had been mocked, the teasing comments that had once made him feel invisible, and the embarrassment of feeling out of place. He let all those memories flow into his music. Each note he played became a declaration. He was more than their laughter, more than their whispers, more than their judgment. He was capable, and now he would show it. A soft gasp escaped from the back of the auditorium as the boy hit a particularly powerful chord. Some of the students who had been laughing moments ago now sat frozen, unsure of what to say. The music was unlike anything they had expected. It wasn't just skillful, it was emotional, almost alive. Every rise and fall of the melody carried a story, every pause and accent reflected a struggle overcome. And through it all the boy's posture straightened. He felt something he had never felt before on stage, a sense of control, of purpose, of quiet triumph. He remembered a time when he had tried to play in front of his classmates in the music room. They had laughed and walked away, calling him names and saying he would never be good enough. For a moment, he had almost believed them. But those memories didn't make him afraid anymore. Instead, they became fuel. Every note he struck now was a statement of resilience. The audience didn't see the hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the nights spent alone at the piano. They only saw the result: a boy who refused to let fear dictate his life. As the piece continued, the room seemed to hold its breath. The melody grew more complex, weaving together moments of softness and intensity. The boy's hands moved with precision, yet there was a fluidity that made it feel effortless. The audience could sense the emotion behind each note, the determination, the hope, the quiet pride of someone who had worked so hard to reach this moment. The music was no longer just sound. It was a story, a journey, a glimpse into the heart of someone they had underestimated. A few students shifted in their seats, whispering to each other. "Did you see that?" One of them murmured, "I didn't think he could do that." Another nodded, unable to tear their eyes away from the piano. Even those who had been openly mocking him now felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. They had assumed he was awkward, unskilled, and easy to laugh at. But they were wrong. Very wrong. And the realization made the boy's quiet confidence grow. He didn't need their approval, but he couldn't help feeling a small surge of satisfaction knowing they were seeing the truth for the first time. The music shifted again, softer this time, almost delicate. His fingers hovered lightly over the keys, producing notes that seemed to float in the air. The audience leaned in closer, drawn to the subtlety and emotion of the performance. Some teachers closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Some students felt a lump in their throats, moved unexpectedly by the vulnerability and honesty in the boy's playing. No one could deny that this was special, something rare and real. Coming from someone they had dismissed too quickly, he glanced briefly at the audience. Seeing the expressions of surprise, curiosity, and even admiration on their faces, he didn't smile. He didn't need to. The music itself was enough to communicate everything he wanted to say. Every chord, every pause, every movement of his fingers told them that he had faced fear and humiliation, and yet here he was, playing like he had always belonged on this stage. It was a quiet victory, but one that resonated deeply, not just with him, but with everyone listening. The boy's confidence grew with each passing second. He began to take more risks with the melody, adding flourishes and subtle shifts in rhythm that he had never dared to play in front of others. He felt free, liberated by the music and by the courage he had found within himself. The audience, in turn, responded unconsciously, their bodies leaning forward, their attention fully captured. Some had never seen someone so underestimated reveal their true talent so completely. The silence was no longer tense, it was alive, filled with anticipation and wonder. He remembered a moment from weeks ago when he had been told he wasn't good enough, that no one would take him seriously. Back then, those words had stung sharply, making him doubt his abilities. But now, in the middle of the auditorium, with every note he played resonating through the room, he realized how wrong they had been. Talent and passion aren't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it takes courage to reveal them. And tonight, he was doing just that, one note at a time. As the music swelled, he let his emotions guide him. There was a powerful chord, followed by a gentle sequence of notes that felt almost like a conversation. The audience could feel it. The boy was telling them a story, not with words but with music. It was a story of struggle, of doubt, of quiet perseverance, and finally of courage. Some students exchanged glances, suddenly aware of how harsh their judgments had been. Others simply sat in awe, unsure if they had ever witnessed anything so moving. The boy's playing had captured something intangible, something deeply human, and it was impossible to ignore. The final moments of this section of the performance were soft, almost whisper-like. His fingers moved lightly, delicately, letting each note linger in the air just long enough for the audience to feel its weight. Some parents had tears in their eyes, others were holding their breath. The boy felt a strange mixture of relief and pride. Relief because he had faced the fear of being laughed at and had continued to play. Pride because he knew that, for the first time, The audience was seeing him not as an awkward boy, but as someone capable of extraordinary talent. As the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a brief, suspended silence. The music had stopped, but the energy in the room remained, vibrating with the impact of what had just happened. The boy's chest rose and fell as he breathed, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. He had taken the first step toward changing how people saw him. He had taken the first step toward showing them who he really was, and as the audience sat in stunned quiet, the boy realized something important. The laughter and whispers that had once held him back no longer had power over him. He had found something stronger, his voice, his courage, his music. And tonight, that voice had been heard in the most beautiful way possible. As the boy caught his breath, he felt a quiet energy building inside him. The first part of his performance had surprised the audience. But now came the real challenge, the moment where he would show the full depth of his skill, where every note would need to carry emotion, and every chord would need to speak louder than words. He let his fingers hover above the keys for a brief second, feeling the smooth black and white surfaces beneath his fingertips. The tension in the auditorium was almost tangible, a quiet anticipation that made his heart race. He closed his eyes again, blocking out the whispers and the memory of the laughter that had once made him shrink inside. That boy who had once felt invisible in classrooms, who had once heard the teasing behind his back, was still there, but he was stronger now. He was not the boy who shied away. He was someone who had spent countless hours alone, practicing, perfecting, and imagining this moment. Every wrong glance, every teasing remark, had pushed him toward this day, and now it fueled him in a way he had never expected. The first notes of the next piece rang out, this time louder, richer, and more confident. It was a melody that demanded attention, a story told entirely through sound. The audience, still recovering from their initial surprise, leaned forward in their seats. Some students exchanged whispers, saying things like, "He's incredible," while others just sat, wide-eyed and silent. Even the teachers, who had seen many performances over the years, seemed captivated. The boy was not just playing. He was commanding the room without a single word. His fingers moved faster now, gliding over the keys with both precision and emotion. There were moments of soft, delicate touches followed by sudden, dramatic chords that filled the auditorium with a sense of power. The music felt alive, as if it had a personality of its own. It swelled and fell, sometimes whispering gently, sometimes roaring boldly. Every note was a reflection of his journey, the fear, the struggle, the perseverance, and the triumph. As the melody grew, some students shifted in their seats again, unable to look away. The boy's performance was transforming the room. Where there had once been whispers, laughter, and doubt, there was now awe and attention. People who had judged him solely by his appearance were beginning to understand that this boy, quiet and awkward though he might seem, was capable of something extraordinary. Even those who had teased him earlier felt a pang of guilt and regret. Suddenly aware of how wrong they had been, he remembered one particular afternoon in the music room when he had almost given up. His fingers had stumbled over a difficult piece, frustration had taken over, and he had been ready to throw his music sheet across the room. But then he remembered why he had started playing in the first place, the love of music, the way it made him feel alive, the escape it gave him from the small cruelties of the world. That memory, that determination was flowing through his fingers now, shaping the melody in ways that surprised even him. The audience could feel it too. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were emotions, experiences, and stories. There was a section where the music became soft and vulnerable, almost fragile, and for a moment the auditorium seemed to hold its breath. People leaned closer to hear every note, to feel the intensity and honesty in the performance. It was not just a display of technical skill, it was a window into the boy's heart. And everyone could see the passion, the dedication, and the courage behind it. A few parents wiped their eyes, caught off guard by the beauty and depth of the music. Some students who had been laughing just minutes before were now sitting in stunned silence, struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. Even the teachers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that this performance was something special. It was rare, something that didn't come around often, and they all felt fortunate to witness it. As the melody progressed, the boy began to take more risks. His fingers moved faster, playing sequences he had been practicing in secret for months. There were small, subtle improvisations, little touches that added personality and soul to the piece. He felt a strange exhilaration. The more daring he became, the more alive he felt. It was as if the piano itself was responding to him, helping him tell the story he had always wanted to share. The audience could feel the energy shift. The room that had once been filled with judgment and doubt was now electrified with excitement. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn into the performance. Some whispered to each other, amazed at what they were witnessing. "How is he doing that?" one student asked. Another replied quietly, "I don't know. But it's amazing." Even those who had doubted him moments ago couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for the boy on stage. The boy's confidence grew with every passing second. He was no longer thinking about the audience, about their past laughter or their doubts. He was thinking only about the music, about the story he wanted to tell. He let himself be fully immersed in the melody, feeling each note as it flowed from his fingers and filled the room. The music was a language, one that transcended words, and it spoke of courage, resilience, and hope. There was a section of the piece where the melody became fast and complex. His fingers moved almost impossibly quickly, hitting every note with precision and fluidity. The audience gasped, amazed at the skill and passion they were witnessing. Some students clutched their seats, unable to believe the boy who had seemed so awkward and quiet could play with such mastery. Even the teachers, who had seen hundreds of performances, looked impressed, their eyes wide with admiration. The boy remembered the moments of loneliness that had defined so much of his childhood. He remembered sitting alone in the corner of the playground, feeling invisible, feeling like no one understood him. But now, with every note he played, he felt a sense of connection. The music was no longer just it was a bridge to everyone listening. Through it, he could show them who he really was. Beyond appearances and assumptions. As the melody began to slow, transitioning into a softer, more emotional passage, the boy felt a calm confidence wash over him. He didn't rush. He let the music breathe, letting each note linger in the air. The audience felt it too. There was a gentle hush as they listened, captivated by the vulnerability and honesty in his playing. The boy had found a way to communicate his deepest emotions without saying a single word, and everyone in the room could feel it. He thought of the laughter and teasing he had endured, and for a moment he smiled inwardly. That boy who had been mocked, the one who had felt invisible, was still there, but he had grown stronger. He had taken all that doubt, all that ridicule, and transformed it into something beautiful. Every note he played was a declaration. He would not be defined by the opinions of others. He was capable, he was talented, and he had a voice that demanded to be heard. The final section of this part of the performance was both soft and powerful. The boy's fingers moved gracefully, creating a melody that was delicate yet filled with emotion. The audience was silent, completely absorbed. Parents, students, and teachers alike felt the weight of the performance. The journey of the boy who had started nervously and had now captured their hearts with his talent. Some leaned forward, as if trying to hold on to every note, every nuance of the music. As the last notes echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of suspended silence. The boy lowered his hands, breathing steadily, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and exhilaration. He had done it. He had taken the fear, the ridicule, and the doubt and turned it into something extraordinary. He had shown everyone his talent, his courage, and his heart. And in that silence he knew that something had changed, not just in the audience, but in himself as well. The boy realized that he had crossed a threshold. He had moved beyond fear and doubt and into a space where his music spoke for him. The audience, too, was transformed. Those who had doubted him could no longer see him as the awkward boy they had laughed at. They saw a young musician who had faced fear head-on, who had poured his heart into his performance, and who had left an unforgettable mark on everyone watching. For the first time in a long time, the boy felt completely free. He had faced the laughter, the whispers, and the judgment, and he had emerged stronger, more confident and proud. The music was over, but its impact remained, lingering in the hearts and minds of everyone in the room. And in that moment, the boy knew that this was only the beginning of a journey where courage, perseverance, and passion would always guide him, no matter what anyone else thought. The music had faded, but the energy in the auditorium did not. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. The boy sat at the piano, his hands hovering slightly above the keys, breathing steadily as if waiting to see what would happen next. He could feel the heat of the stage lights on his skin, the quiet weight of hundreds of eyes on him. But this time, the weight was different. It wasn't mocking or judgmental, it was awe, respect, and disbelief. People were beginning to realize they had underestimated him completely. Slowly, murmurs began to ripple through the audience. At first, it was just a few whispers questioning what they had just witnessed. "Did he really just play that?" One student asked, voice barely above a whisper. Another shook their head, eyes wide. "I can't believe it. That was amazing." Even some teachers leaned toward each other, exchanging quiet nods and glances of astonishment. The boy could feel it, the shift in the room, the change in perception. The laughter and ridicule from earlier seemed to evaporate into the air, replaced by something heavier, something meaningful, admiration. Some of the students who had laughed earlier avoided looking directly at him. A few stared at the piano in shame, realizing that they had judged him without reason, that they had laughed at a boy who had quietly carried the weight of his own talent for years. One student fiddled nervously with a notebook, unable to meet the boy's eyes, suddenly aware of the cruelty in their previous whispers. The boy noticed it, though he didn't let it bother him. He was no longer playing for their approval. He had already proven to himself that he could rise above their doubts and fears. A few parents whispered to each other, clearly moved. "He has such talent." "And such heart," one said quietly. Another nodded, eyes glistening with tears. They had come expecting a small performance, perhaps even a bit of awkwardness, but instead they were witnessing something extraordinary. The boy's music had captured more than their attention, it had captured their emotions. Some leaned forward in their seats, unable to look away, feeling the quiet power of someone overcoming struggle and fear through sheer determination. The boy's fingers rested lightly on the keys. And for a moment, he closed his eyes again. He remembered the years he had spent practicing in the quiet of his room, the small victories no one had noticed, the hours of frustration and determination. Every moment had led to this night, to this stage, to this very instant where he could finally show what he was capable of. And now, the audience's reaction told him something important. The world could finally see the truth. They could see the talent, the effort, the courage he had carried all this time. Slowly, the applause began. At first, it was small and hesitant, almost as if the audience needed to make sure it was real. A few hands clapped, tentative but genuine. Then more joined in, until the entire auditorium was filled with the sound of appreciation, clapping and cheering for a boy who had once been mocked and doubted. The boy felt a rush of emotion. His heart swelled, not because of the praise itself, but because he had finally broken through the barrier of judgment and fear. He had shown the world and himself what he was capable of. Some students stood awkwardly, unsure whether to clap or just stare. They had laughed at him, teased him, and now they were faced with a truth they couldn't deny. The boy had talent, courage, and something even harder to find, the ability to rise above cruelty and doubt. One student, who had been among the loudest at the start, lowered their head, realizing how wrong they had been. Another nudged them, whispering, "We underestimated him." Completely. And the realization wasn't just in words, it was in the way the audience now leaned in, their eyes fixed on him with admiration. The boy took a deep breath and smiled slightly to himself. He hadn't come to this stage seeking approval, but he couldn't deny the warmth he felt knowing that his music had reached people in a real, emotional way. He had always known he was capable, but seeing it reflected back in the faces of the audience was a different experience entirely. It was validating, yes, but also humbling. He realized that talent alone wasn't enough. Courage, perseverance, and the willingness to face fear were what truly made this moment possible. The applause continued, growing louder as more people stood to show their support. Some teachers clapped enthusiastically, clearly moved by the depth of the performance. A few parents stood as well, their faces beaming with pride and awe. Even the students who had been skeptical or mocking found themselves joining in, unable to resist the raw, undeniable talent in front of them. The boy could hear cheers, whistles, and claps, but most importantly, he could feel the shift in perception. He had transformed from the quiet, awkward boy they had dismissed to someone who could command a room with nothing but music and heart. A teacher walked toward the stage, their steps careful but deliberate. They placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, offering a smile that said more than words could. The gesture was simple, but it carried recognition, respect, and pride. The boy nodded silently, acknowledging the support without needing to speak. He didn't need anyone to validate him verbally. The recognition was clear in every glance, every clap, every wide-eyed expression in the audience. The boy's mind drifted briefly to all the moments that had led him here: the teasing at school, the loneliness on the playground, the nights spent practicing in solitude. He thought of every time someone had laughed at him or doubted him. Instead of feeling hurt now, he felt gratitude. Those moments had shaped him, pushed him to work harder, and prepared him for this night. Every ounce of ridicule had been a stepping stone, and tonight he was standing firmly on top, showing the world and himself what he was truly capable of. Some students approached the front of the auditorium quietly, hesitant but curious. They wanted to speak, to apologize, or perhaps to understand what they had witnessed. One whispered, I'm sorry for laughing earlier. That was wrong." The boy looked at them and nodded gently. He didn't need long explanations or apologies. The fact that they recognized their mistake was enough. He had moved beyond their judgment. He had already proven himself through action, not words. The audience's reaction continued to swell. People clapped for minutes, some shouting words of encouragement. Others were silent, letting the impact of the music linger in the air, feeling the story that had been told through each note. It was a collective recognition of not just talent, but courage, resilience, and perseverance. And as the boy sat there, catching his breath, he realized that this was a turning point. Nothing would ever define him again based solely on appearances or the opinions of others. He had claimed his space, and he had done it with grace, skill, and heart. He remembered his parents' faces in the crowd, their expressions a mixture of pride and amazement. They had known about his talent for years, but seeing it revealed so publicly and seeing the audience respond with such awe filled them with pride that words could never express. They had watched him grow, struggle, and persevere. And now that journey was reflected in every note, every chord, and every breath of the audience's reaction. The boy felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his music had changed something in the room. He had transformed doubt into admiration, judgment into respect, and skepticism into awe. People who had once dismissed him were now witnesses to his courage, skill, and heart. And even more importantly, he had transformed himself. The boy who had once felt invisible had found his voice not in words but in music, and it was a voice that would never be silenced again. The applause began to subside slowly, but the energy in the room remained. People continued to smile, exchange glances, and quietly acknowledge what they had just experienced. It wasn't just a performance. It was a moment that would linger in everyone's minds for a long time. And the boy, sitting at the piano, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced fear, defied expectations, and revealed the truth about himself. And for the first time, he felt completely seen, not for what he looked like or how awkward he seemed, but for his courage, his talent, and his heart. The applause had been loud, long, and heartfelt, yet the boy sat at the piano, hands resting gently on the keys, catching his breath. His chest rose and fell rapidly, not from exhaustion but from the surge of emotion coursing through him. He had faced fear, ridicule, and doubt, and he had emerged victorious not just in skill, but in courage and self-belief. The room was buzzing with energy, the audience still processing the performance they had just witnessed, Slowly, some students began to stand, others followed, until the entire auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. The boy looked out at the crowd, at faces glowing with admiration, surprise, and awe. Even the students who had laughed earlier were now clapping, their expressions a mix of respect and humility. A few couldn't help but smile sheepishly, realizing just how wrong they had been to mock him. The boy felt a warmth in his chest, not from the applause itself, but from the recognition of his journey. The years of quiet practice, self-doubt, and perseverance had all led to this exact moment. Parents and teachers alike were cheering, some whistling, some shouting words of encouragement. A few parents had tears in their eyes, moved not just by the music, but by the story it told, the story of a young boy who had quietly carried his talent, endured ridicule, and finally emerged into the light of recognition. Teachers clapped proudly, acknowledging the dedication and courage it took to perform under such pressure. The boy's performance had not just impressed them. It had touched them in a way few other performances could. The boy rose slowly from the piano, taking a deep breath and bowing slightly. He didn't need to smile broadly, his eyes shone with quiet pride, a pride born not from seeking approval, but from knowing he had faced fear and overcome it. The audience continued to clap and cheer, some even calling out words of praise. He could feel the shift in perception. The laughter and whispers that had filled the auditorium earlier were gone. In their place was respect, admiration, and a recognition of talent and courage. Some students who had been mocking him moments before now approached cautiously. One of them whispered, I'm sorry for laughing earlier. You were amazing." Another nodded in agreement, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The boy smiled gently, acknowledging their apology without needing to speak. He didn't hold grudges because he had already learned a valuable lesson. Actions, courage, and perseverance speak louder than words. His music had done what words could not. It had transformed judgment into respect. The boy's mind drifted to all the moments that had led him here. He remembered afternoons spent alone at the piano, practicing pieces that seemed impossible at first. He remembered the small victories, the long nights of frustration, the times he wanted to give up but didn't. Every one of those moments had been a step toward this night. And now, sitting in the spotlight, with the applause ringing in his ears, he understood something profound. It wasn't just talent that had brought him here. It was determination, resilience, and the courage to face fear and judgment head-on. He glanced at his parents in the crowd, their faces glowing with pride and amazement. They had supported him quietly for years, never pushing too hard, letting him grow at his own pace. Seeing them so moved and proud made the boy feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had always known they believed in him, but now he understood fully the depth of their pride. It wasn't just about the applause or recognition from others. It was about knowing that his hard work, patience, and heart had created something real, something beautiful, and something that could touch others. Some teachers walked forward, offering warm smiles and pats on the back. "That was incredible," one said quietly. Another nodded in agreement. The boy accepted their praise with humility. He had no need for exaggeration or flattery. What mattered was that he had proven something, not just to the audience, but to himself. He had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and shared his heart through music. And in doing so, he had changed how people saw him, not just as a student, but as a person with courage, talent, and resilience. The applause began to fade slowly, replaced by murmurs of admiration and discussion. People whispered to each other about how unexpected, powerful, and moving the performance had been. Some students exchanged glances, realizing that appearances could be misleading, and that someone quiet, awkward, or underestimated could carry incredible talent and strength. The boy noticed it, to the subtle nods, the wide-eyed expressions, the quiet respect forming in the faces of those who had doubted him earlier. He walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, feeling the warmth of the lights on his skin. He felt a sense of calm, a sense of peace that he had never felt before during a performance. The fear that had gripped him moments ago was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had done his best, shared his heart, and revealed his true self. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite it. And tonight he had acted. Some students approached him cautiously, extending their hands or offering quiet words of praise. "You were amazing," one said. Another added, "I wish I could play like that someday." The boy nodded, feeling warmth and humility. He didn't need to boast about his talent. He knew it, and the audience now knew it too. What mattered more than talent was the effort, the heart, and the courage behind it. And in that, he felt a quiet sense of triumph that went beyond applause or recognition. The boy thought briefly about the journey that had brought him here. He remembered feeling invisible, awkward, and misunderstood. He remembered the laughter, the whispers, and the moments when he felt like giving up. And yet, every one of those moments had shaped him, strengthened him, and pushed him to practice harder, dream bigger, and believe in himself. Tonight, he had proven something powerful, that perseverance, courage, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt. Ridicule and fear, the audience's energy was still palpable, even as the applause waned. Some parents were quietly wiping tears from their eyes, moved by the beauty and honesty of the performance. Some students were speaking in hushed tones, sharing their astonishment with each other. And the boy felt it too, the quiet but profound connection that had been created through music. He had shared a part of himself, and in return, the audience had shared their admiration, respect, and heartfelt appreciation. He took a final glance at the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys. He felt a sense of gratitude for the instrument that had been his companion for so many years, the tool through which he could express himself, his struggles, and his dreams. The piano had been more than an object. It had been a friend, a teacher, and a bridge between him and the world. And tonight, it had helped him tell a story that could never be told with words alone. The boy stepped back from the piano, feeling the floor beneath his feet and the warmth of the stage lights on his face. He looked out at the audience one last time, seeing faces glowing with admiration, surprise, and even a little humility. The laughter and ridicule that had once surrounded him seemed like a distant memory, replaced by recognition of something far more important: talent, courage, and heart. He had been judged by appearances and assumptions, but he had risen above them, and the world had taken notice. Some students quietly approached him, offering congratulations. "You were incredible," one said softly. Another nodded, adding, "I never imagined you could play like that." The boy smiled, acknowledging them with a nod and a quiet, "Thank you." There was no arrogance in him, only humility, pride in effort, and the satisfaction of having shared something real. He had proven to himself, first and foremost, that courage and perseverance mattered more than fear or judgment. As the audience began to slowly file out of the auditorium, the boy felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond recognition or applause. He had faced his fear, embraced vulnerability, and shared his heart through music. He had transformed doubt into admiration, skepticism into awe, and ridicule into respect. And perhaps most importantly, he had changed how he saw himself. No longer defined by fear, judgment, or doubt. He felt a sense of freedom and confidence he had never known before. The boy glanced one last time at the piano, gently closing the lid. He felt gratitude, pride, and quiet satisfaction. He had faced fear, ridicule, and self-doubt, and he had triumphed. He had shared his heart, his talent, and his courage, and in doing so, had left an indelible mark on everyone who had watched him. The applause, the admiration, and the respect would fade, but the feeling inside him, the sense of having faced the impossible and succeeded, remained forever, walking off the stage. The boy felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. He had faced the laughter and ridicule, transformed fear into courage, and shared something deeply personal and beautiful. And now, as he left the spotlight behind, he knew that nothing could ever define him again solely by appearances or assumptions. He had discovered something far greater, the strength within himself, the power of perseverance, and the courage to rise above fear. The performance had ended, but its impact would linger in the boy, in the audience, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The boy had not just played music. He had told a story, shared a journey, and revealed the heart of someone who had once been invisible. and in doing so he had left the world and himself forever changed.